Hi, I'm Bernie Altsuler. I was born February 26, 1922, Omaha, Nebraska. Wise Memorial Hospital, and Dr. Abe Greenberg delivered me. I'd like to tell you about my parents. Both of them came from a shtetl called Dvinsk, Russia. They met over here in the United States and got married in New York. My dad is the sole survivor, and all of my relatives are on my mother's side, the Cookland side of the family. Okay, as I said, my dad was the sole survivor, so all of my relatives are on my mother's side. After being born, we lived on 26th and Seward Street in the old 24th Street district. We lived there for a few years and then moved to 24th and Cummings. We had a house right next to the fire barn. And my dad started Central Mattress Company right across the street. And he, in the later years, moved to 17th in California in a building there, and eventually bought a building on 13th and Cass, I believe it was, for Central Mattress. My folks came to Omaha via the Labor Lyceum, as the Jewish population in New York was quite heavy, and they were moving them west. And my parents ended up in Omaha because they had a relative here, Willie Cookland. And my dad, looking for work, went to work for LG Dopp Company, who was a mattress manufacturer, and he worked for them for several years before starting out 25th and Cumming. Was, as I said, next to the fire barn, and I was 5 years old when we moved, but I can remember to this day that I was the mascot of the fire boys next door. And we later moved to 33rd and California Street. And my brother Harry took me to Henry W. Yates School, which was the biggest building I'd ever seen in my life. Led me, he was in 8th grade, and I was starting kindergarten. Harry took me into the school and enrolled me. I graduated from Henry W. Yates, and over the years we moved several times to 36th and Davenport, and then to 34th and Webster. Some of my old friends were Shelley Bernstein. He lived on 33rd and Webster, and we were very close friends. And my mother was one of 17 children, many of who never made it to the United States, as they were deceased in the old country. But she did have about 4 sisters and 3 brothers here in the States. There was Willie Cookland, Joe Cookland, and Dave Cookland, who ended up in Lincoln. I had a sister, Ella, who was married to Jewel Shapiro. My brother, Ella was the oldest. Then came my brother, Milt, who was a police reporter for the Omaha World-Herald until we went to California. And then my brother, Harry, was in business with my brother-in-law, Jules, and my dad and Harry. They owned and ran Central Mattress Company. My mother's 3 sisters, 2 of them lived in New York. One was Pauline and one was Rose. Pauline was a spinster, and Rose was married and had 2 children. Rose was a seamstress, and I remember she used to come to visit, and she would always make me, on the sewing machine, 2 shirts, and that was one of the thrills of having a tailor-made shirt when I was a kid. The other sister His name was Gitzel. And she and her husband homesteaded in Torrington, Wyoming in the early 1900s. They ended up living in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And that was really the gist of my mother's family here in the United States. She brought a cousin over from Europe and raised him in our family. His name was Louis Cookland. He was married to Kate, who was Kate Fair. And Louis was a cattleman at the Omaha Stockyards, and he passed away several years ago. After graduating Henry W. Yates, I went to Central High along with most of the other Jewish kids. My close friends were Joe Belmont, Shelley Kaufman, Shelley Bernstein, Meyer Diamond of Diamond. In high school, I joined the Rono fraternity. Stuart Muskin was one of my very close friends and still is today. I graduated Central in 1939, and then after graduating Central, I, of course, worked summers at my dad's mattress factory, mainly driving the delivery to University of Nebraska for 1 year, became a ZBT. And the following year, at Lincoln, I did wait on tables in their fraternity house and sometimes over at the SDT sorority house, which was a lot of fun. The following year, I went to school at Creighton University, along with another one of my very close friends, Pete Milder. After the 1 year in Creighton, of course, we had the war come along, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. In the meantime, I met my future bride, Shirley Morty, over at Joe Belmont's house. Then we started going steady, and I was 20 and she was 18, and we wanted to get married, and our folks didn't really care for the idea, considering the times the way they were. So I went to California with my brother Milt, and Shirley was coming out to visit me, and when she did, we got married. And we went to a rabbi who we found in the Yellow Pages, and went to his study and got married there in 1942. And 2 months later, I was in the Army. My sister Ella had two daughters, Natalie and Dolores, or Dodie as we all know her now. Natalie married Jerry LeBeau in Chicago, had two children, a daughter and a son. And the daughter and Jerry have both passed away. She still lives in Chicago. Dodie is Dodie Redler, and she and her husband Steve had two children, and they are grandparents of about 4 children. And my brother Milt, who, after we were in California for 2 years, went into business together. We had a packaged liquor store. And prior to that, when I got out of the Army, I worked for a paint manufacturer. And when this opportunity came for the liquor store, Milt presented to me. Well, we decided to go in together in that. That lasted 2 years, and I came back to Omaha. And Milt was married to Alice Perlman, who was a native of South Omaha. And they had 2 children. Barry, who's a dentist down in San Diego, and Michelle, who is in California, and she's a stage manager for several TV productions. My brother Harry had 2 children, Arnie, who is in Houston, and he has 2 children and grandchildren, and his sister Carol is in Dallas, and she had 3 children. Harry was married to Ruth Friedman here in Omaha, and she's a native Omahan. Her father was J.J. Now, regarding me, As I said, I married Shirley Borney, who was from North Platte, Nebraska. And I met her over at Joe Belmont's house. Marge Lincoln was Shirley's aunt. She was a cousin of Joe Belmont's, and she was at their house, asked me if I would take her niece on a blind date. And I said, no, I don't do blind dates, but I happened to go over there and I met Shirley, and she gave me a manicure and we went steady ever since. 2 months after being married, I had been working in an aircraft plant in Southgate, California, and the bureaucracy there drove me out of my mind, so I decided to enlist in the Air Force because I'm sure I was going to be drafted at any moment. So I did. I went into the Air Force and spent 3.5 years, about a year overseas in the Philippines and New Guinea. And upon discharge, I stayed in California, and Shirley and I lived with her folks for about 9 months until I bought a home in a GI project. I went to work for this paint manufacturer, and not having a college education, I found it quite difficult to get a job. So I took a job on-the-job training, and that consisted of driving a truck and working in one of their branch stores in North Hollywood, California. Well, that was about an hour away without having a car. We used to take the streetcar and hitchhike home the rest of the way. And later on, I bought an old car. We finally had transportation. We had the liquor store, as I mentioned, and they were pretty nice hours. We opened at 5 a.m. in the morning and closed at 2 a.m. in the morning, and there were two of us. So we split the shift, and it was 7 days a week. And after 2 years, it became quite a burden, and we were lucky enough to sell the business, mainly because our liquor license was very valuable. And we did that, and I came home to visit and decided to stay back home. And so we moved back here, and I went to work for Bob Schwartz at Robert Supply. I worked for him for 5 years and then decided to go out on my own. I worked for, as I said, with Robert Supply for 5 years. The first year and a half was in the warehouse driving a truck, and then they put me on the sales floor. And when the 5 years was up, I decided to go on my own. And going on my own meant that I was going to do specialties. I wasn't interested in big plumbing fixtures or that. I just wanted to sell toilet seats, pipe, and fittings. And I started in the basement of my house. I had $1,200. And about 6 months later, Irv Landau, who was the sales manager at Robert Supply, came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in a partner. And I told him, yes, I would. And he had $1,200. And we moved to Irv's basement because it was twice as big as mine. And the trucks used to come up in our neighborhoods and unload bags of 500-pound bags of cast iron fittings. And it was a riot. We'd use Paul Landau's wagon to haul we'd unload them in the street and haul them into his basement. After about a year and a half in the basements, we decided it was time to get out of the neighborhoods because the neighbors weren't too happy with semis coming up in their street. So we found a little building right across the street from the south entrance of Exarban Racetrack in 69th and the Center. And we then had enough room to order copper tubing. But there was one problem with that. You had to order 500 feet. And there was no way that the two of us had the money to buy 500 feet of copper or even the room to store it. But we had some faithful customers who would, it was 2,000 feet, not 500. We would take 500 feet, the customer would take 1,500 feet, and he would pay us in advance so that we could buy the copper. And we had several customers that did that for us with other products, cast iron fittings, and things we had to buy in truckload. We just didn't have the capital to do that. But after about a year and a half of that, why, we started to show some profits, and it was no longer necessary for the customers to do that. But we had about 6 customers who really got us. 6 customers, 5 are deceased, and 1 is still alive. His name's Don Janke. And Don's out in Millard, retired, and I see him maybe once a month, and we go to lunch and talk about old times. In 1962, Al Napomnick, who was a general manager of Robert Supply, came to us and said that Elger Manufacturing and Chrysler Air Temp and A.O. Smith water heaters may come available, and would we be interested in Al coming in with us as a partner in obtaining those 3 lines. And we, although wanted to stay in specialties, that sounded like too good an opportunity to pass up. So we said yes, and Al joined us, and we were fortunate enough to obtain those 3 lines. And after having several different buildings around the city where we unloaded pipe and plumbing fixtures and kitchen sinks and all those things, we finally, I think it was 1964, we built a 50,000 square foot warehouse at 78th and F Street. And about 4 years later, right next door, we had bought enough land that we could expand the building. And about 4 years later, we built a new warehouse just to the west of that, of the old warehouse, sold the old warehouse, moved next door. And we operated that business, the 3 of us. Herb was the sales manager, I was the purchasing agent, and Al was the administrative officer, and the 3 of us built the business up and sold out in 1980. I ought to talk about the special people in my life, my 2 boys. The older one is Jeff, and he is married to Mary, and they live in Arlington, Virginia. Jeff spent 18 years in Hawaii, and he met Mary there, and they decided to leave Hawaii and move to Arlington, where her parents were. And Jeff's in the home remodeling business there, and Mary works for a giant, that's the name, giant grocery store. Steve, the younger one, Jeff is 59 and Steve is 55. No, Jeff is, yes, that's right. And Steve went to Oregon State University to take horticulture, and as a student did part-time work for Weyerhaeuser. He just completed 31 years with Weyerhaeuser and has just recently returned from 7 years of raising and planting trees in Uruguay, South America. He is now with Weyerhaeuser in Hot Springs, Arkansas, in charge of their research and development. And he bought a home on a lake there, a nice boat, and I've been down twice to visit, and he's doing very well there and loves it. He has 2 boys and a stepson, and each have 2 children, which makes me 6 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren, because his stepson and his family are like my own children. Okay. So. Shirley and I were married for 57 years when Shirley passed on, and I've been very, very active at the Jewish Community Center. As far as how do I spend my time, well, I go to the Jewish Community Center 5 mornings a week and exercise. I have a lot of fun there with the boys at the health club. It's something I look forward to. The things I didn't mention about prior to this particular time is one of my greatest thrills and pleasures of my life was owning an airplane and flying for 20 years. My very close friend, Harold Abrahamson, and I owned the plane together. We each used the plane, he in his business and me in my business. I used to fly customers to manufacturers and conventions and things of that nature. We were both instrument rated, and we both used to just enjoy being with each other. Every weekend we'd be out practicing our landings and our instrument takeoffs. And that was probably one of the biggest joys of my life. And when we sold the business, we sold the airplane, and something I dearly miss, but I don't believe I could pass a physical today anyway, so we just let that go. I mentioned Harold and his wife Helen being very close friends of mine. The other real close friend is Sandy Brophy. And of course, over the years, my cousin Betty and Bus Rubin and Bay and Ed Epstein. Yale Richards, of course, was one of my closest friends with Ida. And we had a group that were together all the time. And slowly, we're losing a couple of them, but we still managed to see each other. My buddy Harold Abrahamson is very well versed in computer, and I used to accompany him down to Best Buy or wherever he was looking at various computer components. And I always said, oh, heck, I'd never get into that. But when Steve went to South America, he talked me into buying a used computer so that we could correspond. And of course, having Harold tutor me, why I spend a great deal of my time now working on computers. And I just completed buying a very sophisticated computer and really do have a lot of fun fooling around with it. All my nieces and nephews communicate with me. Being that I'm the baby of the family, my nickname with all the nieces and nephews is Uncle Babe. And now I'm Uncle Babe at Cox.net to all. Back a few years, Shirley and I lived in apartments, Richland Park, and then Regency. And Shirley always wanted something with more closet space, and we finally decided to buy a townhouse. And I forgot the year now. 16 years ago, we bought a townhouse in Sunridge, and it was one of the biggest joys of Shirley's life. It was a real lovely place, and people today ask me, why do you keep the townhouse? I keep it because it has such wonderful memories of our marriage, and I would never sell the house because social activity today is, most everybody knows that Lorraine Reese and I are very close friends. She played pan with Shirley for over 35 years, and Dave and she and Shirley and I and my brother Harry and Ruth, we were all, Louis Hurwitz and Art Adler, we were all very close friends and did a lot of traveling together. So when Shirley passed away, Lorraine was right there to comfort me, and we've been very, very close friends, and still
I did
are
mention
today.
about my activities at the Jewish Community Center, but I'd also like to tell you that one of my joys is participating in the sing-along at the Rose Blumkin home. I do that every Tuesday. Ernie Webtobe and I take turns telling jokes. When Ernie goes away for the winter, why I handle telling the jokes every Tuesday. It's a big thrill for me, and out of loyalty I do it because that's where Shirley passed away, at the home. I guess the way I'll end this, I want you all to know how much I love it.